Hello, Dominic.
Hello.
How are you?
Very well, thank you.
Good. Could you tell me about your most recent research?
Yes, I've just finished a project that's looked very closely at place and identity. And it involved a book called My Place, which is set in Australia, and it has a double-page spread representing a different period in history, but it's the same piece of land with houses or dwellings that change over time. But it's also quite a complex book, so although it's a picture book, there are things that adults can take from it and so on. That was the starting point, but the research looked at how the teachers and how the children responded to the book and how they developed ideas out of the book. And during that process, it told us all sorts of things about their identities, about how they saw themselves and their place in the world. And I suppose one of the main findings was this idea we called transcultural meanings. And this was an idea of the many different influences and strands, languages, cultures that came out of the things they said and the things they wrote about and the things they drew. And by the way, one of the schools was in a big city. The other school was right in the middle of the countryside, a tiny school. And yet what we found was a lot of the cultural experiences were surprisingly similar, while there were at the same time huge differences as well.
Right, okay.
So that was one important project for me. Another important project is I'm now in the last stage of a 3-year project in Tanzania.
Okay.
And that's been to do with the teaching of English. And in Tanzania, the primary school medium of instruction is Kiswahili, and then in secondary it's English. So of course the primary pupils need to learn English in order to succeed in secondary school.
And what other things are you currently working on?
I think one of the things I'm most excited about at the moment is to do with curriculum. And I'm interested in the curriculum as it affects children, teachers, but also I'm very interested in how governments and countries and states decide what the curriculum is and what it should be. And I'm just about to release a new book called Creating the Curriculum, published by Routledge. And we're the first to look at Northern Ireland, Scotland, Wales and England and compare their national curricula and put forward some ideas about where we think the strengths and the weaknesses are. And the final chapter in the book suggests how curriculum at national level should be developed. So I'm interested overall in curriculum pedagogy and assessment. Curriculum has become an overarching interest of mine, and when I think about curriculum, I always think about pedagogy and assessment, as I said, because they're linked. I think it's not helpful to separate them too much. Across the world, the thing that gets separated out most of all is assessment. But I know from some previous research I've done that assessment affects, and as you know, this is a teacher, of course, the kind of assessment you use and the kind of assessment you do affects what the curriculum is like. Now within that, I have a long track record in terms of the teaching of English language and literacy. I've also, in the last 2 or 3 years, proposed a new theory of the teaching of English language and literacy. I suppose I've been sort of thinking about this for 10 years or more, but I got an opportunity to act on it more deliberately. And I was invited by Sage Publishers to put together a 4-volume set containing articles and chapters that I thought were seminal, important works in the field. The big job for me as a sort of editor of that is to write a 10,000-word introduction. And rather than just do a descriptive account of the field, which partially it is, I took the opportunity to advance basically new theory. One of the key things about the way I theorize this is the way that language, reading, writing are linked. And that has a convenient link with teachers' work, because they have to think about all three all the time. You know, there's no choice, is there, to just teach reading to the extent, you know. So I first of all, as I say, tried to begin to articulate a new theory. And then another publisher approached me, and I got the opportunity to put it into a very practical book, aimed squarely at early years teachers, as it happened. It's called the Early Literacy Handbook. So it's theoretically informed. So sort of, we like to think it's an intelligent book, aimed at intelligent people, which teachers are, but it's also very practical.
And is it a similar focus in terms of how to combine reading, writing and...
Exactly, yes. It takes that theory. It has separate sections, so it begins with language, and then it has a section on chapters, a section on reading, and then on writing. But of course, by building it on the language thing first and foremost, it's obvious that we consider that language is the heart, really. So everything is linked to language.
And could you also tell me a bit about the chapter in your book regarding the importance of children's names?
Children's names are kind of seemingly not so important. They're so common, they're so everyday. We all have a name. Of course, it's what distinguishes us from animals, isn't it? One of the things. And it becomes clear from the research that they're not only essential part of our identity. I mean, imagine how we feel when someone forgets our name or mispronounces our name, or, you know. Quite apart from that very important thing, they're also very important in terms of literacy development. So obviously in the early stages, kids learn that parents call them something, a name, and they learn then what their name is orally. But over time, they learn to write their name, and in order to write their name, they have to be able to write letters. So when you start thinking this through, it's a fantastically complicated, small thing, the name. First of all, it's a word, and although we all know what words are, children have to learn what words are, and they're not quite the same as the things that come out of our mouths orally. They have to learn that a name is made up of so many letters, that it begins with a capital letter. That in itself is a complicated idea. They have to learn the movements of the hand that allow them to form the letters, and at some point, maybe at the same time, how to type letters. But even more important than that, they learn that each letter has a relationship to an oral sound, to a phoneme, as we might say. And that's a complicated journey that can begin when they're aged round about 3 or 4, but won't be finished probably until they're 6, 7, 8. You know, it's, as I say, learning particularly in English, the links between letters and the sounds that different letter combinations can make. And we do know there's a huge amount of research that tells us that knowledge of how letters represent sounds is essential to learning to read and write. However, what my work has been at pains to point out is it's one small important part of all the important things that you need to be a successful reader or writer.
Well, thank you very much, Dominic, for taking the time to talk to me. That's been really interesting.
Well, thank you for helping me.
Pleasure.